The Hunger Games on Stage open in London, and to say that this is one of the most highly anticipated new shows is an understatement. I went to check out the second preview of this show, and in this video I'm going to share my impressions and a little bit more about what you can expect if you plan to go and see this show. And spoiler alert, I think you should probably wait a little bit longer before you go and check it out, but let me spill the tea. The story is set in a dystopian world where there are 12 districts that are ruled by the capital, and every year each district needs to submit 2 tributes who are going to compete in the Hunger Games, which is essentially a gladiator style televised competition where these young tributes kill each other until there's only one of them left. This is the same in the onstage production and adaptation. It is very much focused on the first book, and if you are not familiar with the book and you've seen just the movie, then just the first movie would be enough to help you get some familiarity with the story. But regardless of seeing the movie or reading the book, it is very easy to follow the narrative in the onstage production because they're not really relying on audiences knowing the story to be able to tell it. I've never been a massive Hunger Games fan, but I have seen a few movies and I have a vague recollection of what happens in them, and from that perspective I can tell that the onstage adaptation is very much true to the story and it follows the exact same events. And in some cases it actually follows the movie very closely, that it kind of loses the edge of being a new onstage production. But I will get to that in a second. So let's start with staging, which I think is one of the most fascinating aspects of the show. And the main reason for it is that this production has been performed in a purpose-built new theater, Troubadour Theater in Canary Wharf. I don't think that many productions get to say that there is a whole theater built specifically for them. But what this approach allowed is that set designer can get as creative as possible and truly build out the world that they are willing for the audiences to be immersed in as much as possible. As I attended the second preview, you can still tell that the show and the theater are getting used to welcoming fans, the welcoming theater goers, and they're trying to figure things out, and that is totally to be expected, especially if you have a completely new theater when you're trying to understand how it lives and breathes. So the staging is meant to represent a combating arena, which is the first kind of set that you see when you enter into the theater. You're also greeted with 2 screens at 2 different ends of this arena, and the seats are positioned around it. So I was sitting in District 1, and this is part of the seating platform that is actually moving throughout the show. So there are 2 seating platforms that are static and 4 that are changing, and depending on what's happening, we are either set kind of around that arena or we are actually sitting parallel to the opposite side of the auditorium. I thought that my seat was pretty good. I was able to see everything that I needed to see. There were maybe only a couple of times when I needed to lean a little bit forward to kind of catch the full view. Otherwise, I do think that because of the way that the whole staging and seating is arranged, most theater tickets will offer you a decent view. The staging is definitely innovative, and there are a few impressive elements, such as this kind of central part of the arena that sometimes opens up and there's like a whole new set that's been brought up. In particular, the scene when Katniss and Peeta are on the train, there was a really fun set that kind of just like emerged out of nowhere. And then, as you can imagine, like all of the capital scenes are very fun and quirky with like costume design and lighting and just that futuristic, picturesque, colorful vibe. And these were probably the most engaging parts of the show visually. There is a lot of fog machine use, in a sense that sometimes this kind of really gives that ethereal vibe to the show, and other times it is used a little bit more in a spooky way when they're in the arena and actually fighting, because sometimes this is basically how some people get killed or disappear. The most highly anticipated part about the staging is the use of combat and aerial acrobatics and acrobatics in general, which they definitely try to incorporate a lot of, and I definitely was impressed at times. But basically what kind of didn't match up in terms of the set design sometimes is that there is quite a lot on the audience to imagine, and there is a lot of space to fill with something. So for example, when Katniss is running, she's actually running in circles, and while we know that there is a lot of physical effort that she's putting in to like outrun the rest of the tributes who are in the arena, you can still see her just like running in circles. And I do think that there's something in terms of staging that could be done to make this more dynamic, rather than just like looking at someone running for like a minute around in circles and people chasing her. There's not a lot of dynamic, and I do appreciate that sometimes we do get shows that are a bit more minimalist and really allow you to imagine these different elements. But I think in this particular instance it just worked like it's a little bit of empty space, and I think that this is where set design could have done more to add that dynamic. And thinking about it, it doesn't even need to be that there is a lot of set design, but I think it's more the blocking and maybe certain special effects that could have been employed to make this more engaging to watch. Because from perspective of the cast, which I'm gonna get to in a moment, there is a lot of effort that goes from all of them, and you can tell that they have trained so hard to be able to deliver these roles. But I think that it's almost that the set design at times doesn't really allow for this dynamic that is really required in the Hunger Games. The use of the two screens is also really interesting because President Snow, who is played by John Malkovich, is mainly delivered that way, and there are also times when the cast is kind of coming through the audience, and also the times some members of the cast are walking on the sides of the set, and then there are also people who are coming from the sky or from the ceiling and going also back up that way. It's just like a really, really big space. So I'm really curious to see how they elevate this further, because I do think that there's almost like another dimension of the show that could be added that is actually related very much to staging and the set design. But in general, I do like the way that things are imagined. I just think that maybe there are a few elements that could be added to really elevate it and to make it almost borderline immersive. And another thing that I think would help that is actually the use of cameras. There are quite a few moments in the show where camera use is implied, especially when Caesar Flickerman is doing his interviews, but somehow it's counterintuitive that they haven't really included any cameras that are filming the actual action that is happening in the arena. There are a few moments in the show when there is, I think, a pre-recorded footage of the action on stage that is projected on these two screens, but I do think that a bit of the live action and camera use would really add to that dynamic and be more like dystopian element. The second point that I have about the show is that I do think that it has potential to be a bit more immersive than it currently is. It was so interesting to see that the audiences came dressed up in different flamboyant outfits. Some of them came dressed up as tributes, and the other ones had like golden and colorful clothing. So I think that there is a lot to lean into the existing fan base here, and that is the moment they can really solidify the show as a fan favorite if it's used well. So when Caesar Flickerman is doing his interviews, he's actually asking the audience to applaud, and I feel like maybe the audience was just not feeling the vibe to get on board with it. So maybe there's something more that can be done to really get audiences engaged, because I do think that this production can actually handle it. So let's talk about the cast. The cast is full of fresh young faces, which is amazing to see. For a lot of these performers, this is their stage debut, or they have been in a few smaller productions. This is one of the biggest productions they're a part of. Mia Carragher is performing as Katniss Everdeen, and I do think that she's doing a really good job with keeping this performance together. There is a lot on her shoulders. When I went to see the show, it was 3.5 hours long, and honestly, she has so many lines. She has a lot of really demanding blocking and a lot of combat scenes and a lot of running around, and I think that she was really good with like staying in focus, staying in zone, delivering her character. And I'm sure that there will be people who will like or dislike her performance, but I think she really showcased that she's dedicated to this character and to her craft, and that she's more than capable of doing it. I'm sure that the more she's doing this role, the more that she will feel the nuances of the role, because the second preview performance is still the very beginning beginning of evolution of the character that she's able to deliver, but I did enjoy her performance. Peter Malark is played by Ewan Garrett, and he was really good as well. The two of them had a really decent chemistry, and some people have made remarks that these two resemble actually the actors who are portraying these roles in the movie as well. So that's an interesting one, but they definitely do have the similar look and feel. Tamsin Carroll played Effie, and she was also very engaging in her role. Stavros Dimitraki was Caesar Flickerman, and I do think that he's also done a good job in delivering that over-the-top TV show host attitude, but at the same time had some fun scenes when he was just like over-the-top capital snob. And the rest of the cast has really offered something unique in a sense that they are very much acrobats and actors who are doing a lot of physically demanding work on stage. However, I don't think that maybe this translated yet into an ensemble. I think it's times they felt very disjointed, and especially because a lot of these acrobatic elements require a lot of safety things, such as they need to clip themselves on so to make sure that they are, being pulled in the right direction. And you have a lot of moments that from like a safety perspective, there is almost like a bit of a extra step that you as an audience member notice, because it's impossible not to notice if someone is like clipping on this thing that is going to pull them up in the sky. So there are certain transitions that were done a bit smoother, but I think overall maybe there is still a few more to brush up so that actually the ensemble can feel like one. I think right now there is a lot of let's show everything that we prepared and let's show how good we are at this and how cool this thing that we're creating is. But then in terms of the actual flow and ups and downs and different maybe emotional charge that is present in the moment, sometimes that is a little bit lacking. But again, these are just previews, so there is hopefully plenty of time for this to change and improve. I think it's also worth noting that this show is pretty loud, especially at the beginning of the first and the second act. There are some really strong sounds that are very electronic and gritty, and they do last a fair bit, and they're like kind of flashing lights, and I do understand that they're there to really mimic the discomfort that comes with the Hunger Games and everything that they represent. But especially the opening of the second act I felt was a bit too long and just like hard to listen to, and I hope that these are also things that they will be able to address as the show progresses. They can definitely be shortened and be more snappier. I do like that kind of like the both Act 1 and Act 2 open in a similar manner, with all tributes kind of being in the side and like Katniss having her inner monologue happening, and you can kind of compare the beginning of the first act and the second act with kind of the context that you have up until then. So it's a nice way to kind of bridge the story, but I feel like the beginning of the second act was just a little bit too long, and maybe to a degree it didn't really resonate because there were like also some choreographies that sometimes just didn't feel like they're needed in that particular moment. You can tell that this production has gathered a lot of different creatives to make it happen. So I am hopeful that there is still potential for certain things to be tweaked and made more impactful to really capitalize on the popularity of this story, on the fandom that it resonates with, to make it truly an immersive experience from the perspective of how you feel as an audience goer. I have to admit that I didn't feel that wow effect, and it's actually really interesting because when I was speaking to a friend, I mentioned that, for example, when I went to see Stranger Things, The First Shadow, I really felt like this is the best thing that I have seen, and I was very skeptical because I love that show and I have seen all the seasons, and I just thought that they could not really do anything that will top that. Whereas like, despite the same person doing the set design and a lot of great names being associated with this production, I just feel that maybe they didn't nail the storyline so it actually drives the higher purpose and that is energetically delivering the point of the story. But it just feels that it's very much about showcasing the innovation in a way of the stage blocking and all different acrobatic things that they can do, and kind of how far they can really stretch this but without maybe nailing the essence of the show and the delivery that is more to do with the heart of the show rather than the spectacle of it. I do think that this show is offering offering something new, and especially going to see it in a completely new theater, it is always exciting. So if you are a big fan of the Hunger Games, I do think that this is one to check out. But you just need to be aware that this show is still in previews and that there is still room for improvement and experimentation, especially with a show that comes with this large scale and also amount of innovation and experimentation that has been involved. So if you want to see the final product, then maybe it's better to wait until they have finalized it, and then you know that you're actually seeing the final version. There are quite a few shows that are opening in the last few months of the year, and I've done this video here where I'm talking about some other highly anticipated shows. So if you're interested in checking those out, then watch that video.